emphasizes caring for marginalized and vulnerable populations. She's also interested in public health and medical humanities, and her hobbies are varied. They include reading, hiking, and spending time with friends and family. So again, I want to thank our speakers, and Dominique, thank you for being first. I'm going to stop sharing. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll have time at the end of each presentation to ask questions.
Okay, hi, thank you everyone for being here. Give me 1 second. Can someone let me know if that looks okay? Okay.
Looks great.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you, Dr. Tanaka, for the wonderful introduction and for being a mentor on this project. And also thank you to the Department of Ethnic Studies for inviting me to be here. And thank you to everyone who's listening to this live or later. But yeah, so I'm Dominique. I'm a second-year medical student at UC San Diego. And this past summer, I was also chosen to be a Sanford Scholar with the Sanford Institute for Empathy and Compassion. And so this project is being done with their support. And so the project that I have been working on and am still working on is centered around breast cancer and decision regret in marginalized communities. So just a little bit of background on breast cancer health disparities. Unfortunately, there are many healthcare disparities that exist, and breast cancer mortality is one of the more prominent disparities, I think. So this is the most updated information that I could find from the American Cancer Society. But if you look at incidence rates, so what racial groups are being diagnosed with new cases of breast cancer the most yearly, and then compare that to mortality rates, who's dying from breast cancer, there's a difference. So specifically for Black women, and this data applies specifically to people who are born females, but in this data, you can see that non-Hispanic Black women do not have the highest incidence of breast cancer diagnoses, but they do have the highest death rates. And the same thing kind of happens when you look at other minority communities. You just see that what you would expect based on incidence is not what you see when it comes to mortality. And a lot of that, unfortunately, can be explained by differences in race and ethnicity. So again, this is just kind of looking at it differently, but this is specifically for San Diego County. I just always like to show that here in San Diego, it's kind of the same thing is happening. So the same trend with, oh, sorry if you can see my mouse, but the same trend with Black women not having the highest incidence rates, but having the highest mortality rates exists in San Diego County, and along with the other minority groups that are represented here. And then there's just a map of California as a whole on the right, and looking at mortality rates, incidence and mortality for California as a whole. And San Diego County actually has one of the highest incidences of new breast cancer diagnoses, which I found surprising. So moving on, why decision regret specifically? So this is some of the information that exists in the literature that has been published, and this was known prior to us starting this project. But breast cancer treatment decisions are strongly influenced by the quality of physician-patient communication, and this influence is even stronger when it comes to patients who are from marginalized or minority backgrounds. Fear of cancer recurrence is higher in minority women, and that's something that could influence treatment decisions, including opting for kind of the most aggressive treatment option, even if it's not the most clinically necessary. Physician empathy is positively associated with shared decision-making and negatively associated with decision regret. So essentially, if people perceive their physicians to be compassionate and empathetic towards them, they will also find that they get to participate in their treatment decision-making to a higher level. And they will regret the decisions that they make less at a later time point. This study in specific was not an ethnically diverse study. And that goes with a lot of studies in general that I found when I was researching this. So also minority women are less likely to have participated in shared decision-making at a level that they desire. And one last study, this was from Kaiser, Northern California, but comparing physician-patient relationships and quality of life, found that minority women report equal levels of compassionate care while also reporting higher levels of perceived discrimination or disrespect. I thought this was a really interesting conclusion for a paper to make, because it seems like those two things, compassion and disrespect, should be mutually exclusive. But this study was kind of suggesting that you could have both. The disparity did not disappear when limited to kind of race-matched physician-patient pairs. And it really raised this question of, are these research studies using a minority-informed evaluation of what compassionate care means? And for some of the other studies that kind of asked this question, they just weren't ethnically diverse. And obviously, ethnically diverse women have different values, different things are important to them. So it's just important to kind of have diverse representation when asking these questions and drawing these conclusions. So the main research question we kind of embarked to answer was, in a diverse population of breast cancer survivors, are levels of decision regret significantly associated with compassionate care? Looking at several key variables tied to it, socio-demographic variables like race, income, education, treatment type, length of survivorship, and many more things. And so there's a lot of sub-questions too. And so what the study was a survey with three main parts. So one part just asking for demographic variables, one part getting clinical characteristics of their breast cancer diagnosis and treatment course. And then the majority of the survey kind of focusing on evaluating levels of compassionate care and decision regret. So the goal was to get 50 participants. Currently, we're at 34 complete responses. So a lot of the results right now, and you'll see in the preliminary analysis, I think are a little limited just by the sample size, but continuing. So for the preliminary results, the three main variables that I will be showing in the later slides are race, education, and income. So this is just a background of the participants so far in the survey. So a little bit over 50% of the participants have been minorities. And then if you look at the top, so there's a skew towards postgraduate education level, and the majority of the people with graduate education are white and non-Hispanic. And then the same thing, lower with income, the highest income bracket is primarily composed of white and non-Hispanic participants. And so for some of the preliminary results, these are just a couple questions that were asked on the survey that just kind of pulled out and did a quick analysis of. But one question was, how often did your doctor use words that were hard to understand? And another question is, how often did your doctor speak too fast? And so when you separate the surveys by education level, and it was also significant with income level. But when you stratify people by education or income level, the results are statistically significant that these different groups experience or respond differently to this question. So at higher education levels and higher income levels, they're less likely to feel like their doctor used words that were hard to understand, or less likely to feel like their doctor spoke too fast. Another question was, I am satisfied with my body image. So these are the results broken down by race, ethnicity, and then also income. These were not statistically significant, but you can just see the difference in the breakdown. Another big question was, how is your doctor at showing care and compassion? So this is just it broken down by race, ethnicity. So again, not statistically significant. I am hoping at this point it's just because we are still collecting survey responses, but you can see that there's sort of like a difference in means, with lower answers being attributed to Hispanic or Latino respondents, or Black and African American respondents. They have a lower mean. But for the most part, I think, yeah, for the most part, the respondents to this survey so far have been relatively satisfied, I guess, with their doctors showing care and compassion. But then when you look at this question, so how often did doctors pay less attention to you because of your race? And you look at it based on ethnicity. So again, not statistically significant, primarily just because of limited sample size, but you can see that there's a difference in means. There's a little bit of a higher answer to this question. So more often, people perceived or felt this way more often if they were Hispanic or Latino respondent or Black and African American respondent. And then the same thing with this next question of how often did you feel discriminated against by doctors because of your race and ethnicity. And then this other question was, I regret the choice that was made. Here I just lumped it in between white, non-Hispanic, and all of the minorities combined, but there is a higher mean when you look at the minority responses. But again, not statistically significant. But yeah, so that's just the preliminary data that I wanted to show. And because I can't draw any conclusions about the actual data yet, because we're not done with the survey officially, but I wanted to share just some important challenges and takeaways that I found from conducting research in marginalized populations, research on healthcare disparities. One, there are a lot of pre-existing research studies for so many different questions, but what you'll find is when you look at those questions and you look at those studies, a lot of them are limited in terms of what people they're sampling or who are they talking about. A lot of them will be racially homogenous. There will be a lack of income diversity, a lack of geographic diversity. And so even though some questions may seem like they've been answered already, if they haven't been answered and included a real commitment to diversity, then that's not fully an answer. So it's okay to kind of re-ask certain questions, but doing it intentionally to include more diversity. Another thing, recruitment. Recruitment has been very difficult. And this is often something that's cited when it comes to research about stuff like this or things like that, or just things when it comes to kind of equity, is this idea that like we can't help who responds to this survey, or we can't help who applies to this, et cetera, et cetera. But you sort of can. It just takes a lot of extra effort in terms of finding people to advertise these studies, reaching out to different groups, reaching out to individuals. So it's important to have people that are really willing to put in that extra time and energy to actively recruiting marginalized communities and making sure that they are represented in these different research studies. Also, conducting research in communities that are disadvantaged, there's an added layer of vulnerability when you're looking at this data. It can seem like it's just like numbers and survey responses, but there's more there. And especially when you're looking at disadvantaged communities, it's just even more imperative to really be respectful of the research that you're doing and to conduct it ethically and to kind of do your due diligence when it comes to doing that research. And then the last thing is imposter syndrome, especially if you're a minority attempting to kind of do research in your community with the goal of improving something for your community. There's some imposter syndrome and this feeling of, are you really able to help? Are you really able to make a difference? But really just trust that if you're conducting research conscientiously and respectfully, you're doing something good for whatever community you're doing that research in, and it's important work, and you should continue doing it. And that is all that I have for you. Thank you all for listening. And if anyone has any questions, I am happy to answer them.
Domonique, that was an excellent presentation. Thank you very much. Excellent. And I really want to just, let all the participants know, all the attendees, that a lot of work is put into creating these charts and kind of analyzing the data. Not only do you have to get all the responses together, but you also have to then, subject it to statistical analyses and really kind of think about, just like Domonique showed, even if there's not a statistically significant trend, is there still some kind of trend that you can see in the data? So I really like how you added the mean in there and really pointed that out and some of the differences. Like Domonique mentioned, a lot of research studies kind of hinge on how many participants you have. So we really ideally would love to get as many participants as we can, because that'll make our research, our data more valuable and more accurate. So if anyone in the audience or anyone who sees this later has any connections to communities, and we really mean communities that are marginalized or more vulnerable. As Domonique mentioned, these communities, have a long history of distrust. So my dad was in the internment camps in World War II, and so he just has this mistrust of anything, of especially research. So, that idea of building trust and reaching out to the communities that have been hurt badly in the past is difficult. As Domonique mentioned, it's hard to do recruitment. And the other thing that has compounded the difficulties with recruitment is COVID. So COVID has been hard on all of us. We can't be there in person, recruiting in person. And we ask pretty personal questions. And I was wondering if Domonique could just briefly talk about how much work went into you even creating the survey, and what kind of considerations you had in mind when you created those questions, because that was, I think, probably the most difficult part, is really coming up with a survey that can answer some of these questions.
Yeah, so thankfully the survey is kind of a compilation of a couple different surveys that have existed already in order to kind of evaluate these certain variables. So there's already an interpersonal processes of care that look specifically at, compassionate care, evaluating physician empathy and compassionate care. There's also an existing decision regret scale that looks at decision regret. So for the most part, it was kind of compiling some pre-existing things, but the modifications came, there were certain questions that we added, like the body image question, which is actually proven to be really interesting on the data side. But that was like a question that was added, and then certain questions were kind of modified in terms of how they were asked, specifically with what I was pointing out before about kind of asking about compassionate care and then asking about discrimination. Exclusively, like making those two separate things. And then later when you're going back and analyzing the data, and you're scoring kind of like, does this count as compassionate care or not? The way that things are analyzed and the way that those questions are put together is a little different. So we haven't fully gotten to that part yet, but overall, for the most part, there are kind of surveys that have been researched that I just kind of drew from and then made minor adjustments to, and we'll make some minor adjustments to on the back end when it comes to kind of evaluating or scoring them.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of work. Domonique makes it sound really easy, but it was a lot of work. I mean, it's a lot of sort of literature research, really kind of finding out what's already out there, and then obviously we don't want to remake the wheel, so kind of really just kind of bringing them all together into a comprehensive survey. So if anyone out there, any students are interested in doing research and creating a survey, feel free anytime to reach out to us. We can give you some of the tips, but it does require doing some research and really kind of thinking critically about what questions to ask. And as is alluded to during the talk, you have to adjust the language so that you can so it's understandable to those who are in different educational levels and all that. So for example, my dad's a high school dropout. And so if you have something in jargon, in scientific jargon, he's not going to understand. And if we have a survey that is aimed at looking at marginalized communities, we have to really be cognizant of making the language really clear. And Domonique did a great job doing that. The other thing I wanted to point out to everyone is, I don't know, Domonique, if you could share your screen that shows the flyer we sent to participants. There are a couple of things she put on the flyer. So this is like tips again for students if you're looking to recruit participants. You can do a couple things. You can see there's a QR code that turned out to be very helpful because almost everyone's got a phone around. So we distributed flyers in waiting rooms. So we have that. And then the other thing is to make sure that there's symbolism on there that kind of makes people feel inclusive. So Domonique came up with this design, which I love, but you can see the hands that are raised are kind of a diverse set of hands. So just want to point that out also. And then I wanted to then lastly just open up the floor to any questions for any students, and feel free, you can always put them in the chat also. If anyone has any questions, or if you think of some later, we'll have time at the end also. Oh, I see Joanna. Am I saying your name right?
Yeah, Joanna.
Oh, awesome. Go ahead.
I just had a oh, can you hear me? I feel like I sound so echoey. I just had a question for student Dr. Patterson, in regards to health inequities, right? And like the mistrust of marginalized community in medicine. I've heard in my undergraduate studies, there's a few classes I took, and people talk about like the unspoken curriculum in med school in which people are taught how to do like race-based medicine, right? So like, for example, you give a higher dosage to an Asian American because they're said to have like higher metabolic rates, right? Which is not founded in science, but people still put these things into practice, which can lead, right, to things that are just not accurate. And so how do you, as a med school student, if you've come across that, how do you challenge those notions, especially considering, the effect it can have, and two, that you're not particularly a person of authority, right? Because you have still like your teachers and you're just a student so far. How do you challenge those notions?
Thank you. That is a big question. So yeah, unfortunately, a lot of things like that do exist when it comes to race-based medicine. I can only talk specifically about here at UCSD, but so far in most of my classes, for the most part, and like one big example is kidney function and GFR. That's historically kind of been like one very prominent piece of medicine that has a kind of correction factor for if you're African American versus otherwise. And that of course has a lot of downstream implications when it comes to who's eligible for certain medications or who can be on a transplant list and where you are on that list, and et cetera, et cetera. And so I feel like for the most part, when those things come up, professors have made it a point to kind of point it out and to update it, especially with, again, the kidney function, like that hasn't updated, like there's another lab that you can use for it, et cetera, et cetera. But for the most part, when it does come up, most professors are good about acknowledging that it's not really founded and kind of being clear about what is actually scientifically backed and how to do that. But for the most part, in regards to other things, it is really difficult to challenge it as a student. I would say that participating in things like doing this research, like, or reaching out to certain physicians that you know kind of are knowledgeable about kind of health inequities and whatnot. Just kind of finding those little bits of support and finding what you can do outside of the curriculum makes a big difference. I feel like myself and then also many other students, when they have, brought attention to certain things, and even small things, like sometimes it's like we have like little PBL cases and they'll have a title that's supposed to be like a joke, but then people are like, this isn't really a joke. But sending an email and letting an administrator know that that's not okay and whatnot, most things get changed. And so, yeah, I'm not at the point where I can have any influence, big influence, but the small things do add up and they matter. And so I would say it's just important to, one, remain aware of it yourself, like as you're taking in this information, to just kind of ask yourself those questions of, does this make sense for it to be, different based on race or different based on whatever it's different based on? And if it doesn't make sense, to kind of ask those questions, find out, and then say something about it to one person, if not that person, to the next person. But yeah.
Yeah, excellent answer to a difficult question, and a great question to ask also. And I'd just like to sort of piggyback on what Domonique said. I think if students kind of sort of band together and a whole bunch say something, then it kind of protects you a little bit. So that's one way to sort of enact change as a student, even though you're not at the top of the hierarchy at that point. You still, at least there's some safety in numbers or some power in numbers. And I think it's also important for faculty to really be aware of these issues and really advocate for our students and protect them. So I think that's really a good, important question that you asked. Any other questions for Domonique? And again, we'll have time at the end for questions for any of the speakers. So, okay, I will go ahead. Thank you again, Domonique. We'll go ahead and have our next two speakers start sharing, not sharing their screen, but turning their videos on. And I'm going to share a screen to go ahead and introduce our next two speakers. So let me just start the slideshow. Pardon me for my Zoom. I'm old, so it takes me a little bit to get the Zoom working. Okay, so our next two speakers, the next presentation is going to be two speakers. First one is Alyssa Clayton. She's born in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. She graduated, she's an alumna of UC San Diego, go Tritons. She has a Bachelor of Science in Human Biology, and she was in Marshall College. So if there's any Marshall College students out there, you can thumbs up her. Her future plans are to apply to medical school this cycle with the aspirations of becoming an orthopedic surgeon. And I have to say, I was assisting an orthopedic surgeon last year, and it's really fun. Orthopedics is super, super fun. Lots of power tools, so really fun. And then her hobbies here, as you can see, are varied. They include watching football, especially Miami Dolphins, which fits with the Florida theme, so to speak, and then going to concerts, traveling, water sports, and shopping. So excellent. And then the second speaker, her co-speaker, I guess, is Nkechinyere Iroanusi. She was born in Fresno, California, so she's from Central California. She is a current student at UC San Diego. She's majoring in human biology with a minor in global health, and she's in Revelle College. So any Revellians out there, please thumbs up her. And her future plans is to become a physician. And her hobbies are watching movies and TV, reading, going on walks, and hanging out with friends. So those are our two speakers, but I have another group of people I wanted to also thank who are instrumental in the research project they're going to present. The first person is Dr. Suzanna Flallow. She is a retired Kaiser physician, but she's not really retired. She works just so much. She's very active in the community. She's also a founder of a nonprofit called A Healthier Me. And her resume is so long, I can't hit all the points on it, but she's also recently won awards, community awards, and has won awards in the past. She's amazing. She and Wendy Sherrills, who's pictured in the center, have been really instrumental in helping us recruit participants and also just getting the focus groups together. And the focus groups are what help create the survey. So they've been just amazing. Wendy Sherrills is also the founder of Many Shades of Pink, and she also has received multiple community awards. She used to work for Komen. She's just done amazing things. And then the third person I also want to thank is Shelby Warren. She's a current third-year medical student at UCSD, also in the Prime program, just like Domonique. And she was instrumental in also working on the focus groups, creating the survey, and just really getting this project off the ground in the beginning. So I want to thank these three people, and I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that we can get to the presentation, and we'll go from there.
Alrighty, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Tanaka, for the fun little intro. So my name is Alyssa Clayton. Gender pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm one of the co-presenters for this research project that I'm working on. I'm going to have my research partner, Nkechi, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nkechinyere Iroanusi, and under the guidance of our mentor, Dr. Elaine Tanaka, Alyssa and I have been working tirelessly to understand what compassion means to the uninsured and under-resourced communities of color, especially here in San Diego. So we know that compassion is a quality that's expected from our healthcare providers. When you enter into, whether it be a hospital or a clinic, you want to feel like you're getting compassionate care. And compassion is actually one of the main qualities that medical schools, PA schools, nursing schools look for on applications when they're trying to admit students every year. So we know that compassion is a big thing in healthcare. And we know it's so big that compassion is also beneficial as it leads to patient satisfaction, improvement of patient satisfaction, faster recovery rates, and eases communication of not only sensitive health topics, but also just general topics. You want to feel safe when you're coming to meet your provider and be able to talk to them about, the football game that happened over the weekend, or talk to them about how your kids are doing. You just want to feel comfortable when you're in your healthcare provider, and a lot of that has to come through with compassion. Now, although compassionate care is really important, there hasn't been much research done from the perspective of patients. It's really easy for me, for instance, to say that I'm a compassionate person because I think I'm a compassionate person. However, it might be harder for other people to say that I am a compassionate person throughout the experiences that I've had. And compassion is not from the point of someone who's giving compassion, it should be from the point of the people who are receiving that compassion. And unfortunately, while there has been compassion studies done and compassion research gained, not all of it, or very little of it, is from the perspective of patients. And this is really apparent, especially in communities of color and other marginalized communities, where there's just a distrust in healthcare. And this can be seen especially in this past year with the COVID-19 pandemic, distrust and high rates of COVID cases and infections in these marginalized communities and communities of color. So we know that it's an issue in these communities and it's still prevailing. So we hope to understand from all the research that we're doing that with compassion, we can hopefully use it as a mitigation tactic to these healthcare disparities and help increase health in these communities as well.
So one of the main allures of studying compassion is that it's a relatively understudied topic. It's kind of like an unsaturated market. There aren't really that many studies out there that specifically focus on what Nkechi and I are about to kind of go into. So there really is kind of a limited base of knowledge to determine like what compassion truly means, specifically within the healthcare community. And so that's kind of what we wanted to kind of read more about and capitalize on. So there is a pretty significant gap in knowledge, and it's mostly with regards to compassion, just in general, but also with specific reference to underserved and underinsured communities. So with that in mind, obviously before you start any research project, you kind of want to go back and see like what already exists. And so there are two main models that we wanted to kind of highlight and focus on because there are two of the sort of main compassion studies that were done prior. The first one created what is known as the patient compassion model. It was done in Canada, and essentially what it was is that researchers went into a palliative care facility, so a facility in which patients are at sort of like end of life care for pretty severe diseases like cancers and heart disease. And they did interviews with the patients in the facility and just asked them kind of what they thought compassion meant and if they felt like they were being treated with compassion, et cetera, et cetera. But there were a couple of limitations to that study, mostly in the sense that it focused specifically on patients who were in like advanced cancer, heart disease, that sort of thing. And so that frame of mind, I think an important thing to reference is that they're kind of in a different frame of mind than most others, particularly people who aren't in that sort of age bracket, or not age bracket, more so like health bracket. And so that's kind of an important thing to note because, for example, like maybe they would feel they don't really care what people think about them kind of towards the end of their life because they have kind of a bleak outlook on things, or maybe they're overly sensitive to it because they know the state that they're in. So that's kind of one of the important limitations on that study. And so that study was interesting in the sense that it used, they kind of interviewed the patients first, and then they used grounded theory, which is essentially like you go to a population, you interview them, you get qualitative data, and then you create like a theory or a research question based off of the data that you aggregate, which is almost basically the antithesis to most other research processes because they'll go out with a specific question and looking for an answer. So that was kind of an interesting highlight on that study. Now flipping over to the one on the right, the Jefferson scale of empathy, that one kind of wanted to delve more into empathy from the perspective of healthcare workers, to see if they are being empathetic towards the patients and the people that they interact with every day. What was interesting about this study though is that they actually created a definition of compassion on their own, and they defined it as what's here on the second bullet point: sympathy combined with the desire to help. And what we found kind of interesting about that was that it wasn't a patient-centered definition of compassion. Like the patients weren't asked what compassion meant to them. The researchers and whomever it was that was on the original team, they were the ones that decided that that's what compassion means, which we found was interesting because compassion might mean different things to different people. And it more so matters how it feels to the people that it's being administered to rather than to the people that are giving the compassion. So that was just kind of an interesting finding. So essentially what they did was, it was like a scale, I think about 20 questions or so that was administered to a group of healthcare workers. And then they underwent like a compassion and empathy training, and then administered it again. And there were, their scores elevated at the end. So that is kind of evidence that after structured training, their empathy levels, I suppose, increased. So those were two of the main studies that we referenced in the creation of our study and our survey. So kind of moving on to the next point, this is our research question. What does compassion mean to a Black individual in San Diego? And this is a very, very niche, a very highly specific question. And we came up with this question for a couple of different, or through a couple of different ways. The first factor that we really wanted to kind of capitalize on was the fact that we ourselves, as our compassion team, we have a good amount of knowledge and a good personal relation to the Black community in San Diego. The majority of our compassion team does identify as Black. And so we're familiar with the cultural norms and the social norms that are, you know, requisite or that are kind of pervading that community. And so we feel like we're interacting with people that we are comfortable with. And that is kind of something that's been highlighted in research quite a bit, is that there's kind of a weird dynamic between the researcher and the people that are participating in the project. So having kind of like that community aspect we thought was really important, especially for a project like this, where we're asking people to kind of delve into their personal experiences in healthcare and things like that. Having a good relationship is definitely essential before you can do any of that. So that was an important factor. And the second one was that Black individuals are traditionally underserved and under-resourced. Black individuals are really mostly underserved and under-resourced in kind of almost every area of life, unfortunately, but particularly in medicine. And so this study gives us a chance to give our community a platform that they're not traditionally given. Again, it's just the two of us, but I mean, you have to start somewhere. So those were two important factors that helped us comprise this research question. And so now going a little bit into the research process, it takes a very significant amount of work to get data from a study like this. And so I just kind of wanted to walk y'all through the process of it. So the first part would be obtaining project IRB. IRB is the Institutional Review Board. They are essentially in charge of overseeing all projects that involve human subjects, just to make sure that the people who agree to be a part of the survey, who consent, that they're treated fairly and equitably, and they have the opportunity to disenroll themselves from the study at any time, that sort of thing. So we needed to get our project approved before we could move forward. The second part of it was we used a focus group to create our survey, which we thought was essential. So our focus group was comprised of 10 Black leaders, doctors, nonprofit owners, et cetera, from all across San Diego. And so we met with them on a couple of separate occasions to kind of tell them what our project was about and what we were trying to achieve. And we pooled expertise from all their different fields. And they helped us create a survey that would be specific towards the community that we're trying to learn more about. And they were so incredibly valuable to us. They helped us form and create our survey, which is the next point. So we took their advice. They said, like, you know, the amount of time the survey should take, what sorts of questions should be on there, what shouldn't be on there, that sort of thing. So we took the information that we got from our focus group and kind of aligned it with our research question, and marrying the two, we created our survey with a specific length, a mix of questions, mix of question types. And we created our survey on a website called Qualtrics. And that's what we use to administer most of it as well. And then going into the administration of the survey, obviously grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic, in-person administration of the survey was really hard at first because people weren't really gathering in large places and things like that. So we had to try and do virtual administration, which really mostly relied on personal connections. I know someone who XYZ, or, oh, I know this group of people who XYZ, and we would reach out to them via email. And we did get a lot of responses, or we got a good amount of responses that way. But once vaccines started rolling out and it was safer to gather like outside and masked and things like that, we were able to start administering the survey in person, which was so incredibly valuable to us because we could actually like put a face to a name and we could talk to people about any of the concerns that they had regarding the project. One thing that we actually found really valuable was being able to talk to people after they got their COVID vaccine, because as some of you know, or maybe all of you know, when after you get the vaccine, you have to sit for 15 minutes in observation, and our survey takes about 15 minutes anyway. And so that was really like a good selling point, because people were sitting there doing nothing anyway. So we were like, hey, why not, earn something for your time. So that was a key point of the virtual or of the in-person administration. And then after all of this, we aggregated the data and analyzed it. So we, again, used Qualtrics for that. And that gave us the data that Nkechi will get into a little bit later on. So that's just kind of a brief overview about the research process. And so really quickly, there's just a couple of things about our survey that we wanted to highlight. So I think one of the main points that I found to be super impactful is the inclusion of the Black diaspora. And for those who don't know, the Black diaspora is essentially the voluntary and involuntary movement of people from Africa to other places across the world. And that creates different sorts of identities. So for example, the identifier African-American versus Afro-Caribbean versus like Afro-Latinx, et cetera. And so those were, in filling out the survey, that was one of the questions that we asked, like, which of the following do you associate with? Which of the following identities do you associate with? And for some people, they didn't really understand what that meant. And so it kind of confused them. But for those who really understood like the concept of the Black diaspora and how important it is to be inclusive of others' identities, it was really almost like an honor experience, people said, because they've never felt like seen in that way. And so it was little things like that that I think was really important to include in a survey like this, because we're kind of aggregating data from such a wide variety of people. And so making sure their experiences and their identities really are validated is super important. And another point that I wanted to hit was we didn't want to make the survey too long. That was a main point of our focus group. They said people are not going to be doing this if it's too long. So make sure you get what you need to get out of it. And so we made sure that it was a good amount of time to where we could ask all the questions that we needed, but not too overkill to where people would lose interest and not want to take it, because we can't get data if people don't finish the survey. So we wanted to make it about 10 or 15 minutes, and it was a variety of different questions to include sliding scale questions, percentages, multiple choice, yes or no, et cetera, just to keep the person engaged and to also kind of collect the data in different ways. And then one of the more important points towards the bottom is the compensation. So our focus group also heavily focused on the fact that Black people are often asked for their time and asked for their resources, but not really given anything back. And so we wanted to make sure that we made provisions for everyone that took the survey. So all of our participants that took the survey were rewarded with it, or were given the option of a $10 Amazon gift card if they liked it. Some people declined, but we obviously $10 from Amazon is not going to solve much, but it's just kind of a token of our appreciation to people who took the time to take our survey and to kind of recount some experiences that may not have been pleasant. So that was another important feature of our survey and its administration.
So from everything that Alyssa said, we were able to gather a total number of participants of 83 since the beginning of the survey, since the beginning of the research study. So that was about in 2020, like summer 2020, till now, or since January 16th. And some of the places that we were able to reach people were, for instance, like Alyssa said, personal connections, knowing groups of people, sororities, Black sororities, Black organizations in San Diego. We mostly got a lot of our individuals from a monthly health fair that we would go to at the Jackie Robinson YMCA. It would happen every month, and it would just be an opportunity for us to speak with people while they were there, getting any of their health services taken care of, and also get to talk to them about the survey and gain their interest. So we got a lot of participants that way. But looking at the breakdown of all of our participants, age-wise, most of the individuals were between the ages of 45 and 64, so a little bit older, middle-aged folks. And many of the individuals prefer the gender female rather than male. And then we also had insurance type, which was really important for us to include, as we know that the type of doctor, unfortunately, that you're able to see is really dependent on the type of insurance that you have. So we were able to see that about 42% of our individuals had employer-provided healthcare insurance. 17% of our individuals had either parent or spouse provided healthcare insurance. And then in terms of federally funded healthcare insurance, majority of the individuals that did have federally funded healthcare insurance were use Medi-Cal mostly. And then going back to the Black diaspora, which Alyssa beautifully explained earlier, most of our participants preferred using the term African American, about 40% of our participants. But then also we have, almost split 20 and 20% between Black American, 5% Afro-Caribbean, 10% mixed or some other ethnicity, or 5% African. So it just gave people the opportunity to really say who they are in this experiment and the type of people that we were serving and the type of community that, at least the 83 participants in San Diego that we had as well. So now going into the survey was kind of broken into two sections, really focusing on the culture of medicine, so individuals' experiences with medicine, and then also what they view compassion and how they relate to compassion as a word, and also in any experiences that they've had in healthcare. So looking at this data point, we see that about 76% of our individuals do trust their healthcare provider, and participants felt that they were being fairly treated by the healthcare provider about 63% of the time. But this is kind of where the numbers start getting a little hazy or a little bit not so great. We see that 81% of our individuals strongly believe that compassion is lacking in the healthcare field due to the fact that they do not feel like their providers feel like they're worthy to serve. So basically they're saying that the doctors that I'm seeing, the nurses that I'm seeing, they really don't give me the time of day because they don't think that I'm a worthy person to to receive their care or to receive their compassion, which is definitely not something that you would want to experience when you go to your healthcare provider as well. And a lot of this stems from the fact that our participants believed that that healthcare providers never or rarely took the time to get to know the challenges or barriers that are facing the community, whether that be racist tactics that have been in place or racism that's prevailing through medicine. They believe that their healthcare providers really just don't know or understand, or don't even want to know or understand. And unfortunately, this has led into the fact that about 11% of our participants have experienced inappropriate behavior by their providers. And that number is far too high. Nobody wants to go to the doctor's office and feel or be scared of the fact that they're going to be mistreated or mishandled while they're there. They want to go to their doctor's office and find a place of compassion and a place of peace while they're there as well. So all of these data points and statistics really show us that the culture of medicine is not great, specifically for Black individuals. And obviously there's a change that needs to be made. And hopefully that change is shifting the mind towards more compassionate care as well.
Yeah, so and Nkechi touched a little bit on like the actual culture of medicine and the way that people are specifically treated, Black people are treated specifically in doctors' offices and things like that. And I just wanted to highlight really quickly what the results of our survey showed about compassion in particular. Is there a dichotomy? Is it you're either born compassionate or you're not? Like you get it or you don't get it. And the results of our survey show that it's actually kind of both. Which is not really what I expected, honestly. So on the bottom left, you'll see about 81% of our participants believe that compassion can be learned in an academic setting, which I feel like is almost not something that people traditionally think of when they think of compassion and empathy. Those are often used as like character traits of a person and not something that someone is actively trying to learn. So about 80% of our participants think that that's something that you can learn through academics. The other point that I wanted to bring up was on the right, 92% of people believe that compassion is something that can be learned through life experience. And I feel like that's almost the more like commonly held definition of compassion, is something that you can learn or something that you are and something that's just a characteristic of oneself. And so I think that's also another interesting point. So our data is kind of showing that, I mean, some people just are compassionate naturally, but those who aren't doesn't mean that they're a lost cause. And so kind of touching more on like the characteristics of compassion, like we've now determined based off of our limited sample size, that compassion is something that you can either have intrinsically, but you also have the potential to learn. But when you're trying to learn it, what is it and what is it not? And so this was another question that we asked, like, what are the characteristics, like what are the specifications that kind of like qualify someone as compassionate, and what are things that disqualify them? And so the top four that are bolded were words that almost or everyone for the first two, and then almost everyone for the second two, noted as characteristics of compassion. So kindness, empathy, willingness to help, and warmth. And so in the creation of potentially like a curriculum for medical school, professional school, these are the things that you want to highlight. You want to teach people how to be willing to help and how to be warm to people. And an important point, going back to kind of the cultural aspect of medicine, is that these things look different for different cultures. So for example, in some cultures, it may be seen as, warm to greet someone with a handshake or a hug or something like that. But in other cultures like that may not be, considered as something that's a norm. And so it's being well versed on those cultural norms as well. Again, it's not a one size fit all type thing. You have to make sure that you're treating patients with respect to them as an individual and holistically. And then kind of conversely, one of the things that is not necessarily considered a characteristic of compassion is pity. People don't want to be pitied. People don't want you to feel bad for them. They want to feel empowered when they go to the doctor. They want to feel agency, things like that. And so pity is not something that people particularly like. And so that's not something that, at least based on our data. And so that's not something that we would like to teach in our compassion curriculum. So just those are a couple of interesting findings on that. And so kind of wrapping up, we've done the survey, we've aggregated the data, and we've understood that compassion can potentially be taught, and it can be related to other characteristics that we already know, like I touched on in the last slide. But what we also have found out is that compassion cannot exist without a couple of specific things. And those are the last two bullet points I have there. Compassion cannot be given without understanding of personal like racism faced by specific groups of patients, and then kind of cultural disconnects and things like that. So doing the best that you can as a provider to sort of bridge those things will definitely be essential in becoming a more compassionate provider to your patients. And the second point that I wanted to touch on was understanding the challenges and barriers facing a certain community. And I think that ties back really well to what Domonique was speaking about earlier with regards to like race-based medicine and things like that. So having a patient come into you and just seeing them as a patient and not like, oh, this person is African-American, so they're like EGFR should be XYZ. You know what I mean? So coming into each encounter with a patient with a completely open mind, or like, oh, they're of this descent, so that means that they probably, diabetes, hypertension, et cetera, et cetera. So just coming into each encounter with a fresh patient, absolutely no preconceptions about them is also really important, because it makes patients feel like they're being seen and they're not being correlated to like different little dots that were, learned in different textbooks and things like that. So those are just two really important conclusions that we found.
And lastly, the real question is, where do we go from here? We have this data, we have this small bit of information, and we want to use it in a good way. So one thing that Alyssa touched upon earlier was understanding the cultural norms that are in each certain community, how each community is not the same and one community cannot speak for another. And even a tiny, tiny subset or 83 people of a certain community cannot speak for a whole community or a community as whole. So we do plan continuing the survey throughout the Black community. And then hopefully once we get more information through the Black community, continuing the survey to other communities of color as well to understand what compassion means to them. And along the line or down the line, we hope to create a compassion curriculum that can be used in either medical schools or other professional schools that really emphasizes personal and systemic racism in medicine, the challenges and barriers facing those certain communities of color, and then possibly use it congruently, hopefully with the Jefferson scale of empathy, as we saw was a great way to kind of like see a benchmark of where individuals are at. And lastly, with this being UCSD Changemakers Week, and also with yesterday just being Martin Luther King Jr. Day, you might be asking yourself, what can you do to be a more compassionate person, or what can you do to learn more about marginalized communities or communities of color? And one great way is to educate yourself. There are so many resources at UCSD and online and different places, whether it be books, podcasts, for you to learn and listen about, and also learn how UCSD's School of medicine students are calling for action against anti-racism on campus. So the Anti-Racism Coalition at the UCSD School of Medicine has done an amazing job trying to make the public know and understand what's going on at the School of Medicine and what's going on campus and some of the racist things that they're noticing, and hopefully asking and really just enacting change in their own form and manner. So if you'd like to learn more about what they're doing, you can also check their website, antiracismcoalition.weebly.com, or check out their Instagram at UCSD4ARC to learn more about what they're doing. And additionally, if you yourself are a Black individual over the age of 18 residing in the San Diego area, or know somebody else who is a Black individual over the age of 18 residing in the San Diego area, please go ahead and scan our QR code. It'll take you to the Qualtrics survey, and you'll be able to complete the survey or send it to your friend or your family member, and they can complete the survey. And just like all the other participants that we've been working with, they'll be able to receive a $10 Amazon gift card sent electronically to their email. So obviously, like I said before, 83 people can't speak for a whole, and we'd love to gain more perspective and more individuals. So I'll just leave it on the screen for a little bit in case anybody is still pulling out their phone, copying the link. And of course, I can also send this in the chat later on. But these, oops, sorry. And last but not least, a few acknowledgements to the entire Compassion team, which Dr. Tanaka gladly, or earlier, explained who they were and the help that they've been given to us. But personally, from Alyssa and myself, we just really want to thank Dr. Tanaka, Dr. Suzanna Flallow, Ms. Wendy Shereld, and Shelby Warren, and also the T. Denny Stanford Institute of Compassion and Empathy, really just for supporting us this past almost year and a half now that we are at with this project, and giving us the tools that we needed to succeed in all that we were doing. So we just wanted to take the time to say thank you to them as well. These are some of the references that we use, and obviously thank you for your time for listening to our presentation. We are welcome to take any questions that you all have for us now.
That was an excellent presentation from both of you. I love how you handed that off seamlessly to each other. And as Nkechi and Alyssa said, if there's any questions, please feel free to shout out, or you can also put them in the chat. And they will also put the link for the survey in the chat also. So if you know any other friends, please feel free to share. So we'll give some people some time just to see if there's any questions. I see a lot of love in the chats. All right, so we'll let everyone kind of think and see if there's any other questions. I know it's a very comprehensive and thorough presentation, so if you think of something later on, please feel free, like I said, put in the chat. You can also private message if you want, Nkechi and Alyssa, with any other questions. So I'm going to go ahead and start screen sharing. So I'm going to do introduction for our last speaker tonight. And again, I want to really thank everyone for being here tonight, because I know it is a Tuesday, which is a weeknight. Okay, so let me go ahead and, so I'm just going to share my screen. And again, thank you, Alyssa and Nkechi, for your great presentation. That was wonderful. And for all your work on the project too. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and continue with our last speaker. Our last speaker is Dr. Xi Tang, who is also a UCSD alumnus. So go Tritons. He was born in Yantai, China, but he came here for his school, including getting a Bachelor of Arts from UC Berkeley in both molecular and cellular biology, which I hear is one of the most difficult majors at Berkeley. But he then came to UC San Diego, where he became a Triton and got his MD degree. He's currently doing his residency in family medicine at Northridge Hospital Medical Center. So that's in the San Fernando Valley, just north of LA. He's also working on a new project. He's currently the medical director of Global Supplements and Wellness at Northridge Medical Center. So if any of you have questions about what that entails, please feel free to ask that also. And like I said, you can either ask verbally at the end of the presentation or also in the chat. And his future plans include traveling around the world, and his hobbies are drawing and reading. And if memory serves me correct, I think he's like amazing. He's been doing some work on anatomical drawings. So multi-talented, as are all our presenters today. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and let Dr. Tang take it away.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tanaka, for the warm introduction. I know it's really an honor to be here tonight, and it's a really pleasure to hear all the amazing presentations. Let me share my screen real quick. So, I'll be able to see this. All right, so basically about 1 year ago, when I was in the last year of my medical school, I had the pleasure of doing this project with Dr. Tanaka. And the goal of this project was to study for the correlation between breast cancer awareness and the socioeconomic factors. So there is a short introduction of the background. So breast cancer is actually the most common cancer and the second leading cause of mortality because of cancer among women in the United States. And as many studies have established, disparities exist in breast cancer prevention, diagnosis, and treatment, especially for the minority populations. So as a result, promoting awareness of breast cancer itself and the preventive care is a very important step to decrease the incidence and mortality of breast cancer. However, the question is like, what exactly makes a person underserved or underrepresented? So as many studies have shown that underrepresented and underserved population in the United States are less likely to receive routine medical examinations and thus might experience a much lower quality of preventive health service, including the care for breast cancer. But the real question is, what exactly makes a person underserved or underrepresented, as I asked earlier? So this actually keeps make me recall one of the lessons that I studied during history class when I was in Berkeley. So I remember the professor was saying that race should not only be defined as simply the biophysiological features of an individual, but how he or she tells the stories about them. Otherwise, many factors might be overlooked. So for example, like for myself, when people look at me, they say, oh, this is an Asian person. And when they hear my accent, they say, oh, this is probably just another rich Asian kid who is, studying here. His parents are paying the money for it, blah, blah, blah. So one of the questions I got when I was doing rotations during School of Medicine was, how long are you gonna stay here? Sometimes it's actually the first question they ask me. So like, where do I even start? I became a citizen here a couple of years ago. I'm a student of UCSD School of Medicine. I'm not an exchange student. But I understand sometimes it's just easy, for people to make assumptions like that. However, basically, it's actually a different story. What happened was my parents were working class in China, and there was something about like political disagreement with the government, and so they have to escape to United States. And many years later, I came with them. When I was back in China, I did not have much money, and guess what? Now I have student loans. So I'm not the rich Asian kid they thought I was. So therefore, this experience also gave me some insight onto how to design this study. So in this study, we actually aim to break down the components of a person's socioeconomic status, study for factors like in a underserved population or in a certain underserved individual, what made him or her more vulnerable to lack of health care, including preventive care of breast cancer. So in this study, we studied several socioeconomic factors, including personal factors, such as ethnicity, race, and first language spoken by the person, and some social factors, including level of education, immigration status, and type of insurance that person has. And of course, some financial factors, including income, house ownership, and if this person has a convenient transportation to regular medical visit. Sorry. So the design of this study is a cross-sectional study, which means at a certain point, we study the person's dependent and independent factor. So in this case, the independent would be the factors that we mentioned in the last page, and the dependent would be their awareness of breast cancer. And the target population are residents in San Diego County. And in this survey, we collected basic personal information and did give them a questionnaire, which included 23 true or false questions to evaluate their level of the awareness of breast cancer, including risk factors, symptoms, and prevention of breast cancer. So unfortunately, this study was done about 1 year ago when COVID was really bad. So people were doing quarantine at home, and there was like a limited approach for me to reach out to people, and I cannot just share it to my classmates or family because that would be biased. So what we did was put the link of the online survey in different online groups and reach to local organizations. Hopefully they ask them to help us to distribute the survey to their members. Because we could only reach a limited number of participants, so we had to use the median approach to study for the result. Because when the number is limited, we cannot divide the participants into multiple groups. So basically, we can only use the median to cut them into 2 groups. So we caught the one group relatively good, meaning relatively good awareness of breast cancer, and versus relatively poor. And we use the chi-square test for the data analysis. So basically, as for March 26, 2021, when I submitted the reports, the summary of the study, so we had collected 67 survey responses, among which 55 were scored. It does not mean the other 12 got a 0, but because the survey, the software at the end, at the last step, you have to click submit to complete the survey. If you do not do that, even if you answer all 23 questions, the score would not be recorded. So I was thinking maybe that's what happened. So among the scores that we collected, it ranged from 1 to 19 out of the 23, a total of 23. And the median was calculated to be 8, and the mean was 8.53. So here's what we found through the analyzing the results. So actually I did not have the top column recorded. So basically the middle column, the third one, is the number of participants that have relatively good awareness, and the fourth one is number of participants that have relatively poor awareness. And the last column is the p-value. So basically, when the p-value is lower than 0.05, that means it's significant. So we did not find any significance in at least analytic stat. At least there is no statistical significance in ethnicity. However, there is race. There is a significance in the difference of people from different races. And if you take a look at these numbers, because in the first risk evaluation, there are 4 groups, and it seems like the Asian groups actually have a higher number of people that have relatively poor awareness of breast cancer. So I did an add-on test, which is Asian versus non-Asian, and it's still significant. So if we stop at this point, then we would conclude that Asian people appears to have relatively poor awareness of breast cancer. However, like I mentioned earlier, what exactly are these people? What are their individual factors that might make them have relatively poor awareness of breast cancer? So what I did is I reviewed the other answers of all these individuals. So this is what I found. So basically, I don't know if you guys know what effector modification is. So basically, it's a term that's saying when you find something that is significant in a study, and when you divide them into smaller groups, if there is still a significant, if there is a still significance when you divided them into small groups. So maybe it's these small, it's these small like subcategories that is actually making it significant in the larger group. So basically, by the chi-square study for other socio-economic groups, I found these 2 factors that are significant as well. So it seems like if you are a first-generation immigrant, it would be significant. It would cause a significant difference in awareness of breast cancer. Similarly, if you did not receive education in college or higher level education in the United States, it also puts you at a more vulnerable place of having relatively poor awareness of breast cancer. So actually, I was able to reach to a couple of these Asian participants who are first-generation immigrants and who did not do education in the United States. So basically what I asked them, like, what do you think is making this happen? Like, how come, do you know much about like breast cancer when you're back in the country that you are from? So here is some story that I found that I can relate it to myself as well. So in some Asian countries, actually, they do not have preventative care because they do not have family medicine or other regular checkups. They can do that, but it's not like highly recommended. People usually wait till they have a certain problem, then they go to the hospital. So they do not know a lot, many things about preventative care in general. So it would not be a surprising finding that, you know, they did not know much about the breast cancer prevention and certain risk factors and the possible symptoms. And so there are some future steps that we can take to make this study better. So, well, first of all, is we can get more samples of the participants to increase the power, because we only had a 67 or 55. You know, the power is not really strong. So maybe in other socioeconomic factors, it would be also significant. However, because the power of this study is not strong enough, it's not able to distinguish or be able to tell the difference. And you know, we can use more recruiting method, because last year, like I said, it's during COVID, during the quarantine, we could only use like online method. We actually did not do much in-person service. So, you know, it's going to be biased. And the third one is do analytic studies. Remember, this study is a cross-sectional, so it's only observational study, which means it helps you to form hypothesis. Give you some insight of what can be a hypothesis for future studies. So when you do like an analytic study, it's actually go to test a certain hypothesis. For example, you can do a cohort. You can follow this patient for maybe several years and see, you know, how they do, if they are really have increased the risk factor of getting breast cancer. And after that, you can actually promote changes, not only about increasing the awareness of breast cancer, but also to promote changes in disparity in healthcare system. And I think that's all I have. Like I said, it's really a pleasure to be here, and it's a really honor to share this with you. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dr. Tang. I really appreciate your presentation and all the work that you did on the study and also on the presentation. So thank you very much. And I really want to just also thank just everyone, all the presenters, for working so hard, for just really reaching out to their communities and communities that are not traditionally seen or studied, so and really listened to. So I want to really thank everyone for doing that. And I also want to open up the floor for any questions from any participants. And again, you can always email myself or you know, put a question in the chat, and I'll put my email in the chat. So if you have any questions, you can always feel free to email me anytime. Or if you know of anyone that wants to get involved or has any questions about how to do research such as what we presented today, please definitely just reach out and let me know. So I'll give everyone a few moments, but and I know this is being recorded, so you know, those who are watching the recording, please feel free. My email is etanaka@health.ucsd.edu, so you can always email me, and I'd be happy to connect you if need be with any of our researchers, and also answer any other questions or forward any questions anyone may have. So I know we're at 7:20. We were scheduled to end at 7:30, so we may be ending a little bit earlier. But all right. Well, I will go ahead and then go ahead and conclude this program. Just want to thank everyone for coming tonight and participating and or watching the recording. And please spread the word. If you have any questions, let us know. So have a great night, and thank you again. Monica, I'll stay on and for a little bit.
Okay, well, thank you all for attending. I just want to read this. The Department of Ethnic Studies acknowledges the Kumeyaay people as the traditional caretakers of the land on which UC San Diego is built and the surrounding ecoscapes. We work here mindful in support of all Indigenous peoples in this place, past, present, and emerging. And thank you for attending our Connect with Changemakers event.
Thank you, Monica. You're wonderful. And yeah, please let me know if there's anything that I need to do. So. Should I go ahead and log off?
So wonderful seeing you. And thank you, Brandon, for helping us. It was a great evening. Thanks to you.
All right. Thanks again, Monica. Stay well.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.